welcome on behalf of the Dummerston Conservation Commission. Some of our commissioners are around here. Bill Schmidt is right there. John Anderson is over in the back. Lynn Levine you've seen around. Ed is moving stuff in and out. We'll get started as soon as they finish bringing in the equipment. We were going to have you go outside, but since there's so many, it doesn't make sense. So any questions about anything before we get going? Okay.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. This is a much bigger group than I expected, so if I wasn't a little nervous or all that beforehand, this is great. But I'm taking the pressure off myself, and really what I'm here to do is just to tell you anything you want to know about invasive plants, but in particular tools, because I did a talk last fall, I guess it was, which was much more. Did anybody attend that talk? Okay, great. But the emphasis here is going to be on what you can do on your own properties. My name is Chris Polatin with Polatin Ecological Services. I wear a bunch of hats, and I'll just tell you what they are briefly. I have a new company now called Land Stewardship, but I'll still do Polatin Ecological for these kind of engagements, and then Land Stewardship will be much more my crew, going out and performing restoration activities all over the place in New England. And then I also serve on my town's conservation commission, which is a lot of fun. I'm a landowner of about 100 acres, and this is my daughter, Lizzie, and my son, William, who are assisting me tonight, and then their mom's gonna come and take them home to bed. We live in Gill, Massachusetts, near Turner's Falls and Greenfield, so in that neck of the woods, so this isn't far. And then I also serve on the board for Society for Ecological Restoration of New England, which is fun, and then I serve on a private board conservation group called the Fanny Stebbins Memorial Wildlife Refuge near Springfield. So they're all fun, but it's busy. It's busy, but I have to say that the most engaging and interesting part of my job is just sharing information. So I'm not here to try to sell my services per se. What I actually want to do here is not sell my services, but hopefully empower you. I have a lot of resources. I brought a lot of junk. I always bring way too much stuff with me. And I don't have an absolutely clear vision of what I'm going to cover or what's going to come out of my mouth. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything, but what I thought I would do is just give you the basics of how I'm controlling invasives on my own land. And you might be surprised that that's a little bit different between how I might orient on a project with hundreds of acres of invasives versus my own backyard or my back 40 or whatever the situation is. Can I just get a range of hands? What are you dealing with species-wise? How about if I just name invasives? Raise your hand, and if you don't know one of these, please let me know and I'll try to describe it to you. I looked out in the parking lot to see what I saw, and I saw a garlic mustard, so let's start with that one. Good, that one's easy, unless you have hundreds of acres of it, of course, but garlic mustard's a wonderful one, and that's, of course, right there, right now. It just bolted, so it's about 6 inches tall. It's just flowering, at least near my mailbox it is. And what I found, what do you think, Lizzie and William? We can handle garlic mustard, right? We've been pulling it for a few years. It's a great family project. Anybody can get involved. And really the only thing to do is just to keep hand pulling it. So it doesn't get much more complicated than that.
Yes. Are you going to show pictures of these things if we don't know what they are?
You know, only if I have them, which I do. Well, we can go outside too. It'll be dark by the time we finish, but.
Go pull one and bring it in.
That's right. You think? You guys? You know where I saw it, Lou? It's, if you go this way, all the way at the end of the property, you'll see a few plants. That'll be a test to see if I'm a decent teacher, right? But garlic mustard, you can certainly see it. It's prolific this time of year. It's a biennial plant, so the strategy is to prevent seed set. And the way you do that is to hand pull it generally. So what's bolted at this point, what I mean by bolting is that it's sending up its stems, and then it's going to flower, and then it's going to produce seed. And that'll happen in the next couple of weeks. So it's a pretty quick period where that takes place. I have repeatedly weed whacked it and had success also. It's not 100% because lo and behold, plants in general, but invasive plants have this ability to sprout back very quickly. And then as you knock them back, they'll regrow. It'll take them a few weeks to recoup their losses. They'll send up another shoot, and then they will try to flower and go to seed, but only lower in stature. So you'll see some plants that your lawn, they'll even produce seed below your lawnmower, where your lawnmower will mow. They're so crafty. But at least at that point, you'll reduce seed set by 90%, which is good, relatively speaking. So garlic mustard, I saw some hands on that. I also saw a bush honeysuckle. Does anybody have that? Okay, a lot of you have bush honeysuckle, so we're socked in. Is everybody right around here in Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford neighborhood, Putney, Westminster? Great. Philadelphia, even better. I think all those came from Philadelphia.
Actually, garlic mustard was brought in because it was used as food and medicinal. It was imported.
Good. Let's compare stories here and make sure I've got mine straight. I heard that the colonists brought that in as a pot herb, if I'm pronouncing that right, something you can eat this time of year.
We do in pesto.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. So I think that'll be another theme from this talk. We generally don't like overabundant invasive plant species, but you know, while they're here, you may as well benefit from them. Some people like Japanese knotweed to make use it like rhubarb, and so there are various uses for invasives. But we're going to be mostly talking about how to kill them. Any sign of my daughter yet with the garlic mustard? Not yet. Okay. Then there's several kinds of honeysuckle. I don't really care. They're all honeysuckles except for native honeysuckle. So all of the bush honeysuckles have a hollow stem. But you do have native honeysuckle, and lo and behold, it doesn't have a hollow stem. And if anybody can chime in more meaningfully about native honeysuckles, I'd appreciate it. I've encountered it in central Vermont, in Manchester area. But again, not a terribly difficult one to kill.
Couldn't find any.
No, they didn't find any? Okay.
Not yet.
At break, maybe I'll go out with my flashlight. No luck? All right, well, you tried. Thanks anyway. How about glossy buckthorn? Oh, yeah. This is a real hotbed for buckthorn, isn't it? How about a little lesser known one, common buckthorn? Okay. Of course, Lynn and Cliff have that. Sometimes you don't even know you have common buckthorn, but glossy is very readily recognizable. I do have, as a resource, a bunch of field guides. And what might make sense, because I'm really not going to cover a lot of invasive plant identification right away, but why don't I nevertheless just pass these out in case, as I'm talking, anybody wants to look one up.
We've got the whole pullout out here. Let me show you.
Okay.
This is all
Oh, great. There are a lot of photos and documents over on the other side, so you can look at those during break. Multiflora rose. Okay, great. Not great, but great. Bishop Scoutweed. Bishop Scoutweed, okay. I don't know about that one. I usually don't even go after it. That one's tough. Bittersweet. Yeah, that's kind of the dirty dozen. Winged euonymus or burning bush. Okay. And then I spoke with someone earlier about tree of heaven. Oh, how about the ones that are coming? Now this is the I spend a lot of time in Massachusetts, and what we say is the species, if only we took these early detection species seriously before they got to Massachusetts, and then I say to everybody, yeah, but when I go talk to people in Vermont, and offer to bring them on a field trip to Massachusetts to see the things that are coming up 91. No one's taken me up on it yet, but you really should, as interested gardeners and being interested in your property. It might be a bigger undertaking. However, you really do have to be on the lookout for Japanese stiltgrass. That's going to be coming up. We're dealing with stilt. And it actually makes sense when you see the plant up close, because you pull the plant and it does have stilts, and it co-occurs in floodplains and whatnot. But this is one from, not necessarily from Philadelphia, but in Philadelphia area in the mid-Atlantic. It's just completely taken over a lot of forest understories, which is becomes another challenge. When things are in a very early stage, though, they're easy to deal with. So if anything, come away from this and just count your lucky stars if you've found anything at a very early level of infestation, because at that point you're not going for the herbicides, and you don't have to go that far. You're just hand plucking it, but the first step is always identification, knowing those plants. There's another one called mile a minute vine, which is coming our way from Connecticut. That one's nasty. Yes.
Please describe Tree of Heaven and your mile a minute.
Sure. Well, Tree of Heaven tends to be a larger tree or a mid-sized tree. It looks a lot like sumac, and it smells terrible when you mash up the leaves. Introduced species. You tend to get it co-occurring with Norway maple quite frequently as well. People typically confuse it for sumac, though, but it will grow to a full-grown tree and smooth bark, and it can grow quite large. Really, how big are yours? Those are very mature.
Two or one, I think was over 50 years old, and I know that it reached its peak.
It reaches peak. And then mile a minute looks a lot like tear thumb. It has a triangular leaf, light green, puts out a lot of seed, and it's very, there's not a lot to the plant. It's not like bittersweet, which is very solid. Mile a minute will break, and you can easily hand pull it. There's also a weevil. You guys going by? That can be introduced as a biocontrol agent when it does get out of control. But those are a few species. And I can also point out that this book, actually this would be the best way to go, to pass this over to anybody who's interested. I don't really know where to start, but if anybody wants to take a look at this book to see Tree of Heaven or any of the others. It also has the lookalikes, which is quite handy. But what I really want to talk about is, irregardless of what you have, I like to divide up invasive plants as far as woody invasives and vines. I think about knotweed. We didn't talk about knotweed yet, but knotweed is something you're dealing with, I'm sure. And that one's a whole different animal. But woody invasive plants, I just consider them all, for the most part, one, as far as the treatment methods go. Garlic mustard and other herbaceous species are yet another. And so what I'd like to at least start talking about is what you can do. Obviously, prevention and noticing these plants before they get into your system is a great thing. But there are tools that you can use, basically, that they come down to just pulling tools. So pulling tools would include a weed wrench. This weed wrench isn't made anymore. You can still find them used, but the whole principle is the stem of the plant, it's upside down, by the way. The stem of the plant goes in here, and then you pivot here, and then you uproot the plant in the process, and they're very effective at a weed wrench this size, which is the largest size, could literally take a stem that's about 3 inches in diameter and with some serious body weight, but usually something around 1 to 2 inches. Buckthorn, honeysuckle has a lot of different stems. buckthorn, a single stem buckthorn, would come up nicely. And that's a good point, because if you've been dealing with invasive plants and you're just repeatedly cutting, or even if you cut them once, you might reconsider and think it's nice to have one single stem that you can deal with and just uproot in that direction. And then there are several tools that work on the same principle. This one's called the extractigator. And again, that clamp and then the pivot to bring out anything. I like this a lot for burning bush or winged euonymus. And this is a smaller size, and this is actually the one that I like to use, because if you're going for smaller stems, it just makes a lot of sense to carry this rather than this. But there are 3 different sizes, extractigator, and then on top of that, there's a, oh boy. May I place that in your care for a second? And then this is called the Bigfoot. And this just gives you a little more pivot power right here. It just gives you a little more if you're in muddy situations or something like that.
Is that whole tool called the boot, what is it?
Bigfoot.
Bigfoot, the whole tool, the feet both together.
Together. It's an optional piece, but I do recommend these if you are dealing with relatively small acreage or square footage. These can come in handy, and I'll have them all up here so that people can look at them. There's also one called the honeysuckle popper, which I didn't bring. It just works on a similar principle, but pops them out, and they just stopped making that one recently. This is another extractigator, just a different size. I just think, how to put it? Well, the fellow who made, well, the polar bear also. I probably shouldn't say this. I think there's a bit of an eccentric personality that gets into the business of making tools like this. You know, the fellow who designed and made the weed wrench was a little bit on the eccentric side, and basically came to a point where he didn't want to pay taxes anymore and made it into a whole crusade, and then shut down operation. But one of his employees is now making it. He has a different name for it. I don't know the story about this one, but it's somebody in Canada. And the honeysuckle popper, if you ever met Mr. Honeysuckle, wonderful guy, but a little bit on the eccentric side too. So I think it's just, they just go in fits and starts, that's all. So, here's one. I'm a tool collector, and a book collector, and a paper collector. Has anybody ever seen this one? A little dirty. Well, it's not too old, but it has been used over the last couple of years. This is called a parsnip predator. And it's just a specially designed tool by a group in the Midwest called, they're all about prairie restoration there, and it's this prairie enthusiast organization. And we have parsnip, and you can also use this on chervil. We don't have chervil badly in southern Vermont, right, Lynn? It's mostly further up. But there are regions of Vermont where chervil is just terrible. So this could be something that could be used on that. It's chervil, as it is an herb, but it's considered an invasive plant, and it's not the garden variety, but another variety.
So how does that work exactly?
Well, what it does is it goes into any plant that has a tap root, and you just use it as a shovel, and then this would go down as deeply as possible, sever the tap root, hopefully get below it, and then pry it up. So there are a lot of funny little tools out there, which you really have to hunt and peck for to find, but I I have enjoyed sort of trying these things out, and some people even send them to me. But this completes those uprooting tools. And then the next piece, which is fairly obvious, is cutting tools. And these are things from loppers to pruners to, well, let's start out simple. Typical things that you'll find in your garden. Believe it or not, something like this would be absolutely perfect for bittersweet vines. Not thick ones the size of your forearm, but when they're the size of, smaller than your finger. This type of cutter. This is absolutely indispensable. This is a kind of a nice one that doesn't, that's really nicely made by Felco, but of course it costs a couple $100. But you can replace all the parts. So this has been a terrific tool. And of course, this is a pruner. Coupled with this type of saw, arborist saw, you are absolutely lethal to any plant with this combination. And I tend to favor, use whatever you have, obviously, but I tend to favor a Felco with an extra wide handle, because you can go through things that are about 1 inch in diameter with 2 hands. They're just a bit wider by about 3/4 of an inch. I think it's called the Felco 8.
Is that FELCO?
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, the people that I work with, my field crews, we always have these two pieces of equipment on us, coupled with one other that I'll show you in a moment. And the idea is, if you have these two, you can get into anything, and sometimes you may be holding one of these, sometimes you may have a chainsaw. But the rule of thumb is, my adage is, always look to reduce the vegetation some way, either through pulling it out or cutting it. I was just looking at a site today that I've done without any chemicals, and believe me, I do use chemicals, but this was a site at my son's school, and it's in a wetland, and it had multiflora rose like this and Japanese barberry more like this. And it was completely surrounded, and we went in with a group of, on a service project. I had about 12 volunteers, and we spent the whole time just cutting about 1/4 of an acre and just taking that material out and disposing of it, and it was burned on the landowner's property a little bit later. In any case, we haven't used any chemicals. The plants are still there, as you can imagine. They're still resprouting, but it's so easy to come back and either weed whack them or just cut them back, or some other tools that I'll show you. So the name of the game is often just how to reduce those plants. So if you can take that big honeysuckle, knock it back, haul it out of there, let it resprout, then you can do a much more targeted herbicide application. If you do cut it, you can treat the stem with herbicide, or you can just you can try to exhaust its carbohydrate reserve, so the roots in the soil that want to replenish themselves. And think about it, let me take a quick drink. Think about what the plants are doing right now. Has anybody seen? Yeah, they're growing, they're starting to grow. So knotweed's up about this tall in my area.
Mine's already, some of it's like this tall.
Wow.
It's huge.
Multiflora rose is showing leaves. Japanese barberry is pretty much fully leafed out at this point. What else? Oh, honeysuckle. I haven't seen buckthorn yet.
Yeah, I don't understand it. Buckthorn usually comes up quite early, and the trees are, saplings are coming up, and usually you can see the buckthorn too.
That's right. But some of them just come out a bit earlier. So what that plant's doing is it's putting a lot of energy into the leaves so that it can photosynthesize. So I think that's pretty intuitive. So if you think about the plant is expending a lot of energy at that point, come that interval around May, say May 15th, or even getting closer to June, you want that full leaf expression, whatever that plant is. So look and just make sure that that leaf is completely out, as full as it possibly can be. And at that interval, whack it. It doesn't matter if you pull it or you cut it or whatever. Well, what's going to happen if you cut a honeysuckle? It's going to resprout. So about 6 weeks later, be ready, and then whack it again. It's going to use more reserves to produce leaves, to produce fruit and all that. So it's just a simple principle, even though it can take a while with some species like knotweed. I mean, I've never successfully eradicated a patch of knotweed, but I have successfully eradicated patches of woodies. It's taken 5 years, but that's really like a 2-time-a-year regime or 3 times a year. And of course, if you're out there mowing or something like that, you have this opportunity to just do a lot more disturbance. So another tool, a little bit of a bigger tool, but not impossible, is a brush saw or a forest clearing saw with a blade like this, and they make other blades that you can use. And there's pretty much nothing you can't get through. And what's nice about this, when you have the harness on, is that you're a distance away, so those spiky plants, you can reach in and then knock them back and then back off. Weed whackers as well, but weed whackers generally don't have quite enough torque or the blade to really knock back the woody plants. So the brush saw is nice. I mean, it may not be something that you have lying around, but I find it a really handy tool. And then you start getting into things that you may have lying around or your neighbor may have lying around for mowing. And that would be a tractor with a brush hog or a skid steer with some kind of front mower, or there are various mowers. And then on a very dramatic level, you would have an excavator with a mowing head on that can go through just about anything, including trees. So that might be a little bit drastic, but literally I think everything is worth considering, because just to reduce that vegetation to the point that you can deal with it, I mean, it sounds a bit dramatic to use something like a brontosaurus mower. However, it could make sense if you had a field edge that was completely infested with rose and honeysuckle, because that can reduce that in seconds. And then you have the opportunity to torture it some more when you can reach it. Excellent.
So one of the techniques we've had a lot of success with is girdling, double girdling with that saw that you have.
This type?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and then just double girdling it, and then the next year, all that happens is just the little sprouts come out at the base.
Good. Yeah, good
You
point.
have to double girdle.
Double girdle though. Is there, I think I,
Buckthorn in particular.
oh, that's a really,
What, yeah, not with multiflora rose or,
is it with larger?
yeah, stems that are around.
That are
this
quite large. So sometimes, and that's with probably with
Or less.
or less. So that's great. So I'm already learning something here. I've never tried that, but I will share a little bit of a lead that I have on something. Somebody's developed something. I tried it 2 summers ago with just black plastic, like contractor grade plastic bags. But I thought that, well, what if you cut your woody plant and then you put black plastic on top, and then you took a rubber band or something to keep it tight on the stem. For honeysuckle it worked. For autumn olive it didn't. The autumn olive had the ability to sprout from down below. But I think there could be some potential to this. Now, before I get too far, I am emphasizing the non-chemical approaches. I will get to the chemicals as well, but I don't think that we know everything we need to know at this point about non-chemical approaches. I think there's still a lot of experimentation to be done, and there really hasn't been a lot of impetus to get people to, it's not like there's a chemical to sell or a product to sell if you figure out a non-chemical alternative. I have read a lot and experiment a lot. There are hot foams that you can spray on. I mean, a lot of these things, and even so-called organic products or non-synthetic herbicide products, they do produce a burnout on the leaves. So you spray them, the leaves dry up, but then they resprout. So they don't create the same effect that, say, an herbicide like glyphosate or in a product like Roundup would, where you comes into contact, goes through the system, and kills the root. There is a relatively new product that does say that it acts in a systemic way, and it's a salt product called, I love chemical names, Adios. Back to cutting. This is my favorite new tool, and I actually use this on a native species that drives me nuts, and in particular settings, the goldenrod, just to cut it back. But pretty much you can use anything. Have I exhausted my cutting potential? Okay, now we're on to what you were all waiting for. I know it. You didn't know it, but how about propane flaming?
Somebody just told me about that, that's been, that she heard about it.
Well, here you go. You like flaming? Okay. So this does work. So there's a backpack, there's a propane tank, a smaller one. You can put the bigger ones on, but they're very heavy. You do go through a lot of propane with this technique as well. So be prepared. And then this is called the Red Dragon. It is a really fun tool to use, and of course it could go wrong if you weren't careful. This plugs in, of course, to your propane tank. There is a person, a wonderful guy who I know Lynn knows. Does anybody know? Is it Jerry or Gary?
Yeah, and that's who did the clearing on top of Prospect Hill.
Good. So Gary carries this. He has a big, very rugged tractor, and he carries around huge tanks of propane, and two people have these, running off that with lots of, wire, and they're just setting, all over the place. And again, the one-stop, fire. It's not about getting a fire going, a prescribed fire, or getting the whole, woods lit up or the field. It's really about directing the propane right at usually the base of the plant. This technique does work for Japanese barberry especially well, and there is literature to substantiate it. It's research that's gone on through the Connecticut Agricultural Station through a researcher. There's several, but the one that comes to mind is Jeff Ward. And I am using this wholeheartedly at my own property. And I think what I find interesting is I'm not opposed to herbicides, but I'm trying everything else before I'm going towards foliar applications in my own personal practice or piece. And I have a lot of barberry. And the way I've determined where I want to use this tool versus herbicide, in the uplands I'm okay with the foliar applications, and frankly I have like 20 acres of it, so I better get used to it. In any case, what happens, so generally if you see a barberry plant, at its largest it could be about this big, or at least at my house it is. And then sometimes you'll have barberry plants that are much lower. So the much lower plants you can just go straight in and treat those stems. But you want to hit right where the soil and the stems interact. And you really want to give it a bit of time and watch some YouTube videos like I was doing the other night. And really figure out how to do it, because if you don't do it long enough, it won't work. And I think that's what the problem that I've had. You really have to give it quite a bit of heat. You don't want to set the plant on fire. So you really want to be using this technique this time of year. And of course, in case you do set the plant on fire, you want to have at least something like this to put it out. And that makes it a little bit inefficient for, when I wear my contractor hat, because we're doing very small kind of areas and acreage, and then we have two people basically standing around, usually not doing much, but being on duty just in case. So it's not terrifically efficient, but if you are dealing with your own property, then why not? Typically, I'll prescribe this for just sensitive areas. So it might be right next to your wetlands, right next to your streams, that sort of thing. Maybe the first 10 feet of barberry, you'd do it that way. And then maybe you'd use chemical application, cut and treat the stems, that sort of thing. But I do like this technique, but you do have to be careful of fire, of course. And truthfully, last season when we got into it, it was easier to just to do a prescribed fire along the stream bank. And it didn't kill the barberry, but at least it reduced it. And I found that impressive because, like I said, that whole principle of just being able to take it down and have small plants that you're dealing with generally is a good thing. This also does work on honeysuckle. It definitely does not work on buckthorn. In fact, buckthorn gets mad and grows even more vigorous. Okay, have we? Yes.
Do you need a burn permit?
Good question. I don't know how it works in Vermont. I know how it works in Massachusetts, and the Department of Environmental Protection is regulating smoke. So they're really concerned during the brush burning season, which occurs in my neighborhood up until May. But do you have to call in brush permits? So I think it would be the same thing. I'm really bad. I usually probably do things that I shouldn't do under my brush permit like this. But I'm usually burning a pile of brush, and then I go out in the woods and do my propane torching at the same time. And then, of course, when they won't issue permits, then you don't want to be out in the woods anyway, because you probably will set the woods on fire or something bad will happen. And this can also be used in rain or just after rain. So I'll probably be doing this some more tomorrow. Would be a great day.
When you say give us some heat, how long are you talking? Is it depending on the size of the plant, but
Yeah, generally,
over 30 seconds, a minute,
yeah, I'm more like 15 seconds.
15 seconds?
These things will really cook. I mean, they shoot out a lot of flame at once as you adjust them, and they are adjustable, and you can control it. But you will need ear protection because it's very loud. And about 10-15 seconds on each side. And then the other thing, I didn't describe what you do when the plants are tall. Then you would want to come in and use a brush saw or preferably a mower. If anybody has a DR mower or some equivalent like that, a walk-behind mower, I mean, you can definitely demolish a plant about this size. So bigger plants, that's really helpful, and then do the stems once you've done the mowing. Anyway, that is substantiated by the literature that technique does work, but you do have to finesse it a bit to get it down and know how long the torching will work. I did it in front of a group of kids last year, and unfortunately, I mean, it certainly worked upon execution, but none of those stems were. I was nervous because, of course, people were watching, so it didn't work as well. But you do need a little more time than you would think. Okay, where are we going next? Hand pulling, okay? So if I'm hand pulling garlic mustard right now, I'm using leaf bags, and I'm just putting them in there. It hasn't gone, even if it has gone to seed. But this is only if I'm planning on burning them. So if I'm going to put them in my brush pile, then I'll pile the garlic mustard in, let it sit a season and dry out. In bags like this, it generally becomes dry. In plastic bags, it basically, as would be intuitive, it just becomes wet and a slimy disaster. So this is usually for garbage disposal. I've really learned the hard way how to dispose of invasive plants. Basically, when I do this and I take it to my brush pile, I'll usually have purple loosestrife or whatever's in my bags and garlic mustard, just a few stems that come up the following season. So be prepared if you are going to burn brush that you'll have invasives, not much, but you'll have something to put out a little bit later. I know to expect it. I've also spread Phragmites, common reed, and if you've seen that, the one from Wetlands. This is a whole poster about Phragmites management. But that one has been a really strange thing, and I've learned the hard way not to bring invasives home. So if you have invasives, on your landscape, just leave them there, because you'll be back, they'll be back. Usually I don't use black plastic and dispose of the invasive plant parts, but every once in a while, has anybody seen black swallowwort or pale swallowwort? You're just starting to get that in a serious way around here. Those pods could be treated either way, but it's windborne dispersed. So this is another thing to keep in mind. Say you hand pulled a garlic mustard and it was flowering. Well, that plant will, in all likelihood, will go to seed, even if you've disassociated it from the soil. It's a pretty amazing phenomena. So just be mindful of that you may just want to bag it and put it in the trash for disposal. You can also just let these bake in the sun for several weeks, and then they can go into a brush pile as well. Sometimes people put them on tarps as well, just to let the plant material dry out. But disposal is a real issue. Yes, sir.
So, when you're using the black plastic, we've had giant hogweed.
Mm-mm.
It's just a horrible plant.
Wow.
And we've been told to put it into bags like that, polarize it was the word they used.
Right.
And then dispose of it, but, that's just a crazy, terrible plant to have.
There really is. Does everybody know about hogweed? Well, that's good. But you should be aware of it. It looks an awful lot like cow parsnip and others. There are a number of lookalikes in that book that I was... Exactly. The thing about hogweed is it's giant, so it's much bigger, and there's some identification pieces you should be aware of. But where it's really caused a lot of trouble is the oil. It's not like a poison ivy oil, but it's based on sunlight, it can cause just terrible skin abrasions. And people have gone blind, mostly children, because they cut it and they look through it and put it up to their eye, and it's been really quite tragic.
That one and the other one that we have is butterbur.
Oh,
Giant butterbur. Looks like rhubarb, leaves this big.
okay. I'm not familiar with that one, but a look-alike to hogweed. Is that right?
No, it looks like rhubarb.
Well, it
Oh,
runs
look,
underground on a very rapid root system.
Gotcha.
Where do you live?
That's Brown Borough.
Yeah, that butterbur. Butterbur. And that's the funny thing with common names sometimes.
It may not be that.
Well,
That's what we were told it is.
exactly. So it'd be good, and that's an interesting piece here is that so there are invasive plants, and that's what we're here to talk about. But you may have other plants on your property which wouldn't necessarily be called an invasive plant. A good place to look would be vermontinvasives.org. That'll tell you sort of the tried and true invasives. It doesn't mean you can't go after other weeds, but there are they're just different levels of what a weed may be. And generally it's good to have some consensus on what we should be going after. I will point out though...
VT invasive.
VT
As opposed to
invasives.
spelling out the whole word.
Good point, thanks. I deal with a lot of states. This just happens to be a terrific piece from University of Connecticut, and it's called Guidelines for Disposal of Terrestrial Invasive Plants. So this is something that you can find online.
Where is that from?
Connecticut or University of Connecticut, or a group called CIPWIG, Connecticut Invasive Plant working group. And they, by the way, have sort of our New England conference. There have been different iterations of a conference, but UConn and CIPWIG kind of generally every other year. This fall they'll be offering a big invasive plant conference.
Can I ask you about a plant?
Sure.
It drives me nuts when I walk in the fields, it has burrs all over it.
Sure, a plant with burrs, is it
Sticks to anything.
burdock? That's what I was thinking, yep. So that one generally isn't considered an invasive weed, but probably more of a agricultural or a ruderal weed. which doesn't mean it's any good or you shouldn't get rid of it, but it's one that I'm less familiar with control techniques, though I will say that parsnip predator may be your friend, because it does have a deep taproot. Yep. So that's disposal. Now where are we going? Ready for chemicals? Okay.
Urban versus fields.
Mm-hmm.
Where I live is on the main road and in West Brattleboro, and I have this 1/4 acre that has the tree on it, plus sumac, a lot of invasives that I've taken out. I can't think of the name at the moment, but
Oh, is it the
the little
Olanthus?
the Olanthus is there, but now I've got all the suckers. Actually, they've spread over about an acre, which means it's gone into your neighbor's yard. So you have
Right.
you have the problem of getting permission if you wanna do anything to talk to your neighbor.
Right.
And I've got a lot of out-of-state neighbors because they're landlords.
Sure.
And then, so here you have this big project with a lot of people. Is there any certification that this is the project we're going, is there any procedure that has been set up with we're gonna remove this invasive?
No, I think it's neighborhood by neighborhood. I mean, it's a matter of organizing an initiative, talking to your neighbors, and that's often, can take years to organize.
You're not there, do it anyway.
But I've worked on a number of projects, and they do take a while to set up, and it depends on the techniques that you're going to use. And then a big sticking point is obviously who's going to pay for it. The projects where somebody says, "Let's do this, and by the way, I'll pay for it," those usually go a little more quickly.
Oh, that's a good point. It's just, but I know I have 15 acres, and then I have this little piece in Brattleboro, and I'm gonna have to use 2 different techniques for getting rid of the invasive. The larger lot is all honeysuckle,
Mhm.
a lot of it. So,
Well, the other thing I'll mention is the Natural Resources Conservation Service has been encouraging people to team up on projects. I'm just trying to think. I think I've talked to Chuck Armstrong about it, and Lynn, you may know something about this as well. But if you have invasives and then you want to work with your neighbors, I think those projects may rank more highly in the eyes of NRCS for contracts. So, for whatever that's worth. But those are challenging because you're really at that level where you have to talk to your neighbors, walk the land, have a common interest in doing the work. It's really difficult to do your side and then their side is spilling back in. Just looking over here for a photo. I've done some work on Cape Cod, and that project, that's 20 different landowners involved with it. But there was one person who was interested and did the permitting and dealt with all the issues, organized the landowners. At this point, for 2 acres of Phragmites, it basically costs $200 a year. And so I'm getting checks from 20 different people for $10 here, and it'll go on for years, and that's fine. But I do wish that they could figure out the financing so that I didn't get so many checks to deal with. But this has been a really great project. So there are highs and lows of working with multiple landowners, and I'd say ultimately you get to a great place, and those projects tend to be more sustainable over time. And especially if you can train people and then all get together to do hand pulls and that sort of thing, that can go a long way. But I think I can certainly talk to you more about that. I have some ideas about how to organize them and whatnot.
have the tree boards in the state of Vermont, do you know if they've been involved at all in any of this?
Not that I'm aware of, but if anybody else can answer that. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, herbicides. There it is. So, if you're not completely opposed to the use of herbicides, I think this tool or this technique really strikes a decent balance. So this one is in use, so, and it does have chemical in it, so I'll just hold it myself. But it's called the buckthorn blaster. It's a small tool. There are a few ounces of herbicide, of concentrated herbicide that will go in this. It's available commercially, but from one person in the Midwest, so you'll have to search for buckthorn blaster. They cost $6. So nobody's making a great deal of money on this. What I like about it, and the reason we use this commercially as well as I use it on my own projects, is that it's spill-free. It has a sponge applicator. These can be switched out. So when this is worn out, you can pry this open and install another one. With a lot of use, they do tend to just become damaged over time. But if you're using this just on your household level or in your backyard, I'm sure it'll last a while. Buckthorn blaster, this woman, Cheryl Colberth, it's landscaperestoration.com. She sells these, and she'll also sell the sponges along with this handy dandy tool to take the sponge off. And she'll sell the herbicide as well, which turns out to be products that you can find, which are Roundup concentrate, and then she sells these nice little squirt bottles of blue dye as well. So you may put in the Roundup concentrate and then put some dye in, and then you're shaking it up and then cutting or sawing and then treating the stems. If it's a large stem, then it's the cambium layer or the outside layer. And if it's a small stem, you're just putting the entire, you're dousing the entire stem, that is. So if it's the size of my finger, you'll be applying the sponge right there. And then likewise, if you have lots of very small stems like bittersweet, multiflora rose, etc., you can also use this or other tools to just, I mean, the paint store is your friend with this level of herbicide application, where you just want to treat each and every stem as small as it may be. But the nice thing about this technique is those plants generally don't come back if you use enough, and it doesn't take a lot. So even though I'm not a huge fan of Roundup and glyphosate products and all that, I will say you don't have to do it with these products. You can use the manual approach, etc. This will be much less effort. It'll be basically once you cut that plant, treat the stem, that's it, except for seedlings that will emerge from the soil. At that point, you're going to have to be dedicated to hand pulling those plants. Something like burning bush is going to be ongoing. It gives out a prolific number of seeds. Bittersweet, not so much, because the seeds, you have to think about how long the seeds are going to be viable in the soil. And bittersweet seeds are only viable, the new research says 1 year, so that's good news. Generally, it's 3 to 5 years, so you've got to be dedicated to this hand pulling process for a long time, which is reasonable if you're, on your own property and just dealing with square footage rather than acres of the stuff. If you do approach that point where you're dealing with acres, then I think it's a different matter. You may be moving towards, a contractor situation or more intensive chemicals or some other solution like livestock in fields, field edges, that sort of thing. Another one I didn't give, I didn't mention in sufficient detail would be your soil solarization with black plastic or some other product. The only thing I'd encourage you to do is invest in a really high quality plastic and something. I do have the names of some things that I'm going to try. I tried lumber wrap on about 6 projects last year, and they all were destroyed. So they all photo-degraded, and I had to replace them all. It was really depressing, but I learned the hard way. I think 6 mil plastic would be better than lumber wrap, but there are other products, covers that work great and will last for years. And a caution, because most people are tempted to do it with their rather Japanese knotweed. Keep in mind that knotweed is a superorganism. That's what I call it. And that plant over there and that plant over there are related somehow. Okay, so they're in a rhizome network. So if you were to cover this with black plastic, yet this knotweed across the street doesn't get anything, that's going to be feeding your patch over here, even though that seems counterintuitive. It seems to work that way. So if you're going to try the black plastic on the knotweed, be prepared to do it for years, and also be prepared to dig a trench around the entire population, and then put rigid black plastic down so that the plant can't travel. Because you put the plastic down and the plant will start to come up.
How deep do you have to go?
You have to go about 2 feet. It's not as deep as you would think. Well, a lot of people think you have to go down 6 feet. Maybe realistically 16 inches, but that's still. So a trencher, I use a trencher to do that you would rent, and then the rigid black plastic is something you have to find. There's something called a deep root barrier, which you can find commercially, and then lay that, and then put the black plastic, and then of course sandbags or staples or something like that. But I've used that technique successfully on field edges as well. But keep in mind, if you do like this technique, which a lot of people do, we're always doing something destructive to get at these plants. And just think about the black plastic. The way it acts is it's going to basically solarize everything in the soil. So you're going to have a denuded or dead soil. There'll be no life to it as far as the microorganisms. So, that will come back over time, but you will destroy that element. But in the name of not using synthetic herbicides. And it's a value judgment. You just have to figure out there are alternatives to the synthetic herbicides, but they do work, and they do work pretty well. I'll just show you some other tools. This is a bit more industrial of a dabber. A sponge goes on this end, and this is called a PVC sponge applicator developed by the Nature Conservancy. And so your herbicide goes into this reservoir, and then you have an adjustment right here. And you can build these. These cost very little money if you're somewhat handy with plumbing equipment. Products that are available, Orthomax, Poison Ivy, and Tough Brush Killer. Roundup ready to use, Poison Ivy plus Tough Brush Killer. This is a couple of years ago that I acquired some of these things. And of course, you're going to want things like throwaway coveralls, depending on what you're doing, chemical gloves, and then other forms of gloves just to protect your hands. Generally speaking, the herbicides require long sleeve shirts, long pants, gloves, eye protection when you're mixing. And I'll just say this plug or this relatively new idea as I've been doing a lot of workshops this spring. I don't necessarily recommend that if you're going to approach chemicals that you go into it with the foliar applications. It depends on your goal. So it depends on your goal. I really far prefer cutting and treating the stem, and I'll tell you the difference as I've been observing for years. When you cut it, remove it, and then treat it, that plant's not coming back. Seedlings may come back, but you can deal with those through hand pulling. The foliar applications, what happens is these are monitoring photos from a site, and they travel this way. So we had some really bad infestations of glossy buckthorn and bittersweet and honeysuckle, basically reduced them all. But what you end up with is an awful lot of bare ground at the end of the day. And the bare ground is tricky. And what I've noticed when there are foliar herbicide applications in the mix, this bare ground has this legacy effect that does last a while. And I have this series of slides which shows basically industrial strength foliar applications going through, you know, 100% infested area with winged euonymus. And there's absolutely no understory as a result of the foliar applications, to a project that we worked on with Lynn, where sugar maple was the objective, sugar maple regeneration, and we were able to treat barberry in a relatively targeted fashion. Though what happened was you wouldn't have any vegetation growing right where the barberry was, because it, you know, the barberry was taking up that space. To another site where we just did strictly cut stem work. And the cut stem work in the area that I described at the school just earlier in the presentation, those areas just come back with understory right away, or you never affect the understory. So I'd simply say that when you can get away with it, when it's reasonable to do it, use the cut stem method, because you will hasten that regeneration of whatever you want in your woods, the field edge, etc. With the foliar, there will be, just pass this over here so that you can see that. With the foliar, you may need to deal with this effect of the foliar application, be it a triclopyr-based herbicide or a glyphosate-based herbicide or whatever. And it may be that you want to actively revegetate. In some cases where I'm working at more of an industrial scale, where you just have a lot of invasives and you're traveling on 70 acres of land, for example, it's a different model. Regeneration does happen, but you may be talking about 3 years, something like that, just so that you're oriented in that direction. So that's my sense of how foliar works versus cut stump. Yes?
Will the cut stump work with dormant plants, or?
It will, right. Cut stem or cut stump, there's a cut stem or stump versus cut surface. Cut surface is something where you're using a water-based herbicide. So this would typically, for the work I do, be rodeo herbicide, which is glyphosate, which is fine for use in sensitive areas and that sort of thing. A cut surface, that's cut surface. A cut stump would be with another class of herbicides. The active ingredient is triclopyr, and that's typically Garlon 4 with something called basil oil, but not basil the herb, but BASAL, kind of an oil carrier, and that can be used in the winter, all through the winter. The only time you wouldn't want to do cut stem or stump or cut surface would be during sap season, from about the end of February till mid-April. Does that make sense?
I think so, because it's rising to the plant? Or?
That's right. So just physically, the plants will start to push, their sap will push the herbicide out, and it'll just be marginally effective. It won't be as effective as it could be.
How
Yes, sir.
about the big grapevines
Yeah.
that are, they could be anywhere from, a couple of inches to as big as your arm?
Sure. I don't think that we do treatments on grape, and I could certainly see how grape could be considered a problem in some landscapes. Generally, I don't get involved with grape because it is a native species, but I also have worked with foresters who really don't like it in certain circumstances, or when they're trying to encourage regeneration, and sometimes there is an awful lot of grape. I treat grape like bittersweet, though, as far as techniques go, so you can use that cut and treat method. It's so tall that really bittersweet and grape would be treated usually when it's growing in trees that way. You can make a huge difference, and this is a good way to think about bittersweet itself. Even if you don't use any chemicals at all, think about bittersweet as different levels where bittersweet is a problem, and maybe the primary level is when bittersweet is growing into trees, because it really does a lot. It does affect them, affects their crowns, and can really start to wrap their ways around and torture the trees. I don't know if this is true. I've been told that bittersweet will actually grow into a tree and overtake a tree, whereas grape has a different effect on a tree, or grape will grow more gradually as the tree grows, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but generally I just don't see grape as being such an aggressor as bittersweet is. Would you agree, Lynn?
Yeah, and also, so the grapevine has some positive,
Yes.
that it's producing fruit that so many birds, whereas the bittersweet is producing fruit that is not helpful for animals. It's for birds. It's a low quality food.
Do you see circumstances where grape bothers you, or that it's something to be viewed as something to control in any silvicultural situations, or generally not?
Generally not.
Generally not. Yes, sir.
You will find that in heavy windstorms, the top of a tree will cause that tree to go down where other trees don't. So
When it has
this
grape?
wind throw from grapevine
I see, sure,
loses timber.
sure. Understood. Yes,
When the stems are really small, and that,
like what stem, or
well,
what type
let's
of
take,
plant?
we'll take buckthorn and bittersweet.
Okay,
They're so small that the application of an herbicide
I am listening, I'm finding something as I'm,
with, cutting it close to the ground, there just isn't enough surface area to absorb. How do you deal with very small plants?
oh,
I mean, I've got maybe several thousand buckthorn in my field.
sure.
And they've been mowed for
Oh.
20 years, 3 times a year, and it doesn't do anything. And they're all small, but I don't know what to do.
Oh.
I can't, treat each one.
Well, here's where I'm gonna be hypocritical when I said, don't foliar spray. Well, that sounds like a foliar spray matter.
They're so close together that you'd just be killing all the field grass.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
So, yeah, well, no, I've got a solution for you. But triclopyr herbicide doesn't kill grasses.
I can't use it because I'm not certified.
Okay, well, on your own property, you're
I
allowed to.
can't buy
No,
it.
it's gotta be
I
certified.
can't buy it and I can't use it.
Gotcha, okay. So anyway, so generally speaking, the triclopyr herbicides are what I would use in a field situation with buckthorn, especially stringing buckthorn. I mean, generally speaking, what I subscribe to is you do the cut stump on anything tall. This is more in the contracting world, on anything overhead, because you don't want to spray overhead. And then getting everything to be low so that you can do a targeted application. But in field situation, then I would use triclopyr, which won't toast your grasses, but it'll do a great job on buckthorn.
The only way I can use it is to violate the law and go to another state that doesn't have Vermont's regulations. I mean, it's not we've been working on this for years, trying to find ways around certification and so forth. Because when you get certified, you learn how to mix stuff up to go out of airplanes and tank sprayers on.
I've yet to do that, but right.
No, but there are various, levels of certification. And to get it for your own profit, well,
You gotta pass the basic one, and that's still,
but that's no big deal.
No, it's not, and I'm sorry that I don't mean to, I probably am not prepared enough in this presentation to adequately address the rules, but I thought, certainly the case in Massachusetts, but I thought that landowners could apply herbicides on their own properties. Not the case,
can't buy them either.
because you can't buy them.
Both.
Both. Wow, okay.
One point on Garland, you mentioned Garland 4. If anybody is using it, stay away from Garland 3. You can lose your eyesight with that.
Yeah, there are, Herbicides, each one really has something. You have to read the label, and you really have to understand what you're getting into. And it's true with the Garlon 3A. The risk is when you're mixing the herbicide, and then the Garlon 4, the rodeo herbicides, and then there are a few others that are a little more technical. It's certainly simpler. Oh, but what about the products that you can buy at the hardware store? I agree that I don't think that there is a triclopyr product that you could foliar spray. So those would be more commercial products that would be available. That's a new one to me. I'll read up on that. I'm sorry if I misled anybody. But I thought that landowners could apply to their own properties. Okay. Oh, here's another one. For the Japanese knotweed folks, this may not be something that you rush out and buy yourself, but this is a Japanese knotweed stem injection gun. So if you detect a theme here, I tend to like these really targeted applications that take forever and drive you absolutely nuts. This has an herbicide reservoir that comes on right here. I have that as well if anybody's interested. And you're basically applying 3 to 5 milliliters of rodeo or a glyphosate herbicide into each stem. So the interesting part about this is that it's targeted, it's certainly targeted, but you're using many, many more times, the herbicide that you would need to do the application than if you were foliar treating. But this is a tool that I use sparingly, usually near wetlands or right next to flowing water, open water. But it is here, and there are a number of different needles, and this can also be used on giant hogweed or anything with a hollow stem. So that's my stem injector, and I have so many other things that I could tell you about. That really is the piece about tools. The only thing I really do want to mention is say you do successfully get rid of these plants. There's one other technique that's really cool, and it's just not all that interesting, but it's kind of intuitive that this would work and be a good thing. But I brought this poster, and this researcher basically did a number of herbicide applications on Japanese knotweed. And anybody who's worked on knotweed knows that one herbicide treatment or one mowing or one anything isn't going to be enough. So what this researcher did, it's somebody, our friend from Philadelphia just left, but this researcher is from that area of Pennsylvania. He did the knotweed treatment with a foliar application, and then he put down a grass mix, but it was a native grass mix and a very tall, prolific mix, non-invasive though, but with a native emphasis. And he did find that a couple of years later, those mixes were holding their own. So in other words, if you take this principle and to any situation, if you plant it dense enough, think about something with enough cover to outcompete whatever it is you don't want to grow there, that could be a good idea. Let's think outside the box or towards agriculture for a moment. I love using cover crops along field edges and other situations. So using buckwheat, oats, rye, things like that could be something that you just use as a placeholder for a couple of years just to get something established, flood out those sprouts and those seedlings, and then move on. Then plant what you really want there. I think at this point, I'll take your specific, maybe I should mention one other. And that is, I don't think I have any photographs to show you, but this one is called it's right over there if anybody wants to see a photo of it. It's called the glove technique. The Nature Conservancy came up with this, and I sort of stole it from them, but you would wear one of these gloves, actually a bigger glove, a chemical resistant glove, underneath of a cotton glove, which is absorbent, and then just take a squirt bottle and or put your hand in a bucket and wring it out, and then whatever you touch, you can do your own form of foliar application that way. So they call it the bloody glove, I call it the glove. It's great for use on knotweed, Phragmites, pretty much anything, but you know, it becomes a little unreasonable to use on some of them, especially with prickers, but mainly Phragmites, but really if you've got the patience and you don't want the effect of the foliar application I was describing, that's another one. I mean, I've been out there in the marshes with a bucket and 2 of these and just sort of rubbing, giving, you know, plants massages. You have to worry about getting enough herbicide material on each leaf for it to be effective. And then there's this other tool called the Sideswipe Pro, and if you're a golfer or a hockey player, it looks just like this but bigger, and it's got a sponge applicator, and you can likewise wander through your area just dousing the plants or rubbing the plants with the sponge. Your percentage is different though. You're up to a 10% with this type of technique, whereas you're up to something closer to 20, 25 with the cut stump to 50%. And it kind of varies. The other thing, I think Lynn had mentioned it with the girdling. The other one, that technique that I didn't mention, is called hack and squirt, where you would have a hatchet and then you would squirt the herbicide into those incisions. With Ailanthus, what I read a lot of literature and go to a lot of conferences. If you do your girdles and leave, or if you do a small chainsaw or hatchet cut but leave about 2 inches or 1 inch between the cuts, it doesn't promote the sprouting response for some reason. Whereas if you do a whole girdle on Ailanthus, it'll sprout like crazy, as you probably experienced. But if you do that girdle cut and then spray or sponge in the herbicide, that does kill the tree quite effectively the first time around. And then the sprouts can be dealt with, but it's a different chemical and some stuff I could tell you about later if you're interested in. Yes?
Smooth sumac in a big patch. Is there any way to eliminate it or control it?
Well, sumac's tricky.
That was my question too. But it was nice to read that it's not invasive, right?
Well, it is. I guess we should talk about a quick definition of it, because there are native invasive plants, but these aren't on an official list.
Right.
You know, they're not on the official kill list. It doesn't mean that they're not. I call them interfering vegetation, and it's just like the definition of the weed. A weed is a plant out of place. So I sympathize with smooth sumac and others in field situations. In the Midwest, I follow a lot of literature out of there. The prairie folks, they don't like aspen, they don't like sumac, because they're trying to promote grasslands and prairies and that sort of thing. And those plants are really hard to kill to begin with. And I think you are looking at more of a clonal species. A clonal is like, you know, a plant with a rhizome. It will just keep coming back forever. But if you do cut it and treat the stem, you do stand a better chance. And in our, you know, woods, beech tends to act that way as well, or be very difficult to kill from that standpoint.
A non-herbicide approach to it.
They do exist, and I'm not sure I know them. But if you want to stay in touch, I can certainly send you references or send you links to other websites. I have my contact info up here. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I've pretty much moved away from using Roundup or any of the commercial products. Just it
Sure.
seems the literature and common knowledge seems to be heading the direction of that these are bad products and we need to stay away from them. So what I have used as a substitute on some property I have down in Florida, where I have some grass issues where I need to do some control, is using 20% white vinegar, which is a 200 grain vinegar, which I have found kills faster than Roundup, particularly in an environment where plants are really good at coming back. And if you add a little Dawn dish detergent in with the vinegar, that helps, because the detergent, I guess, helps remove some of the oils on the plants, which are then allow the sunlight to penetrate the plant in a different way and break it down. And that in conjunction with the vinegar seems to be a pretty good alternative. So I don't know how that works on all that we've talked about here, but it might be worth some experimentation.
Sure. I think it would work. I have no doubt that vinegar wouldn't cause that burnout. You'd have to do repeated applications, and that's okay. Just be prepared to do it. And the difference with the synthetic herbicides is it's really a one. Anything that the herbicide obviously comes into contact with will usually die, whether it's something you want to kill or not. But if you have that value set, and I respect that, and I know a lot of people do have that, I've got no problem with it. Just certainly be prepared to be in it for the long haul. Do it repeatedly, and you'll get there over time. It's trickier for me to wear that hat as somebody who will guarantee that it'll be done in a certain period of time. But let's be realistic. I don't want to wave the banner of herbicides are good. I don't like the invasive plants worse than I don't know what I'm trying to say. I dislike the invasive plants so much that it puts me in that position to consider using synthetic herbicides. But there is increasing evidence, opinion on the glyphosate products that we have to be critical and think critically about using them. So thank you for mentioning that. The European Union just declared them as a likely carcinogenic for the glyphosate in general. So we have to take that seriously.
If they ever do this, we've got 80 million acres of corn and soy in America that is grown with that stuff. Our agricultural economy would disintegrate almost instantly if they ever banned it. I mean, we've just created a monster. If some of this is true, eventually it's.
Right, and I try to keep it separate between agriculture and invasives, and I think the scale at which, at least I'm advocating for the use of chemicals or careful, judicious use. I wouldn't want to keep doing that forever. What I found is you can use it over a course of 1, 2, 3 treatments, and then be off the bandwagon if done carefully. But you really do get that effect. But use sparingly. Yes, Mary
I
Ellen.
wanted to, before too many people have to leave, Claire, I wanted to, they've got a project going on in Putney.
Several people, quite a few people here know about the Putney Mountain Grazing Project.
Want to stand up,
I
Claire?
think you know about it too.
I do.
Okay, and I have some handouts here. We're also, this is the third summer. Randy Major knows all about it. His son's sheep are up there. We're also looking for volunteers to help tend the sheep. So if that brings any kind of something you might think about doing, I have some information here, so come and see me.
That's great. And if I could just add on to that, I did see that project early on, came up as, to give my opinion. Buckthorn growing at the top of Putney Mountain, no.
Putney Mountain, yeah.
Exactly. And I was advocating more for the carefully cutting, treating the stems approach. And the group really wanted not to use herbicides up there. And the most interesting thing, most people say that, but most people don't go as far as you've gone with the animals, and that's wonderful. I'm personally working with 6 goats this season. It'll be my first goat herd just for my own property, because I just think, that makes a lot of sense.
It should be like a rent-a-goat thing, where you could just have them for a while.
There are companies that do this, and there are also lots of partnerships going on, and lots of willing.
Goats eat knotweed?
Absolutely, easily. They have no problem. They'll eat rows in some cases,
I just
multi-floor
eat
rows.
knotweed's the only thing I have.
Yeah, that literally could be a decent solution, but just keep in mind it's going to be years, but it could be a good solution. Yes, sir.
A question, Japanese barberry,
Yes.
Japanese knotweed, Japanese spirea, Japanese honeysuckle, and Japanese stiltgrass. Are these not invasive in Japan?
No, they're not.
What do they do with it?
Yeah, they're not. I'm not,
Do
I
we have an
can't,
exchange program maybe?
if it makes you feel any better. Our goldenrod is the scourge of Europe. Canada goldenrod. So invasive, the plants are going, and I'd love to understand this a little bit better. But basically, every country, every place has its natural predators. I don't think this is the absolute perfect way to describe this, but I think insects have an awful lot to do with controlling plant populations. And then you get, you take away the natural predators, and then they proliferate. These plants do. There's probably something also keyed to soils and all kinds of other, factors that would be interesting. I'm sure people have studied that, but it's usually the insect pressure that most people cite. But I have heard that a lot. I have friends that have traveled through Southeast Asia and seen a lot of these plants and said, yeah, they're just there. They're hanging out. They're not doing anything much. They're not in great quantities. And then I've also seen there is a native North American Phragmites, or common reed, and it was really funny to see. Somebody had to tell me that that's what it was and help me identify it. But it was about a patch about this size, surrounded by non-native Phragmites, which was about a foot larger and just everywhere. So it really is interesting to see how these plants just go, hog wild on the landscape when they don't have their natural checks and balances. But I'd like to get a better answer to that. I'm sure somebody studied it. I think that's about it for me on the formal presentation. I'm happy to stay as long as people have questions or let people go. What would you like to do, Mary Ellen? Do you want?
Questions are fine as long as people want to.
Sure, but also don't let me keep you if you need to get going. But I'm happy to stay here for a while and just answer questions as I can.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Sure thing.